My name is Doug Schrantz, and I was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas in 1952. My dad was Kenneth Schrantz, and my mother's Eileen Schrantz. My dad was born and raised in Pine Bluff also. Mother was from Wilson, Arkansas. They met at the University of Arkansas back in the 30s and married and moved to Pine Bluff and started life. Dad worked for Arkansas Power and Light, and Arkansas Power and Light was founded in Pine Bluff. At that time, he was an engineer and in the management of area for the company. Mom had a 2-year teaching certificate, which was possible back then, and she did not teach because she started having babies pretty quick, it seems. And so there are 4 children. I have 2 older brothers. One is a retired doctor now that lives in Jonesboro. That's my brother Jim Schrantz. My older brother Ken Schrantz was an ROTC officer in the Army after college and served in Vietnam, and unfortunately was killed in a crash after returning, a military crash, and he died at age 33. So I have a younger sister who now lives in Little Rock. Her name is Diane Schrantz, and we all lived in Pine Bluff until we took off for college, and we've kind of gone different directions. I have very good memories of growing up in Pine Bluff. It was a wonderful town. It was a large town at that time. We had a lot of family around still, and were involved in all the typical things people would be involved in, church and school, and quite active in the Boy Scouts, among other things. And Dad was a scoutmaster, and my older brothers and I were involved, and I have very good memories of growing up in Pine Bluff. I left Pine Bluff, like all of us, when I went to the university, off to college, and I went to the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville for my undergraduate degree. And while there, decided to go to law school. No one in my family before had ever been involved in this field. And I had some fraternity brothers that were in law school, and in talking with them and in general about what their experiences were there, I became interested and ultimately did attend law school at Fayetteville. Another good experience. Everyone's afraid of the idea of law school and talk about the fear of the professors and all of that, the Socratic method and all of that. It was a tough experience, but a good one, and prepared me, I think, very well for what I'm doing now. Had a lot of interesting classmates, like you've mentioned. You've interviewed David Matthews, and David's a little ahead of me, as a year older, but got to know him well there. And I had, by chance, he had been involved in DeMolay and I had an uncle that was a DeMolay leader from Pine Bluff who traveled throughout the state and participated with these various DeMolay chapters around, and he got to know David. Told me David was going to be governor of the state one day, and I believe he would have been if the parties hadn't changed. So I had that connection with David. We became good friends. At the time I graduated from law school, I realized there was not going to be an opportunity for me back in Pine Bluff. The reason for that was there were a good number of people from Pine Bluff in my class in law school, or the class behind me, that had some connection with the legal community there. I did not have that. As I told you, no one in my family had ever been involved in this field. And I just did not see the opportunity. So I started looking. And I started first looking for a position clerking for a lawyer. And I got a job working for a guy named Don Kendall, who was practicing law here at that time. And when I graduated from school, we worked out an arrangement that basically was office sharing. And ultimately I became a partner with Don, practicing, and that's how that came to be. I think I was very lucky in landing in Rogers, Arkansas. Rogers was a small town. Rogers was about 14,000 people when I moved here. I came in December of 1976, and the ice storms that were taking place at that time. Matter of fact, we were unable to complete our move entirely because you couldn't get back and forth between here and Fayetteville, if you remember that ice storm. Stayed on the ground for several weeks, it seemed, and it was really kind of tied everybody up. Small town, interesting atmosphere, good people, and it looked to me like a great opportunity. We knew Rogers was growing. Rogers was in the early stages of some of its growth, and I, after being here a year, had the opportunity to run for city attorney, and because of the connections I'd made during the time, that 1 year period, I would say Rogers is very accepting. And even though I was a foreigner, they accepted me, and I got elected city attorney.
Did someone come to you and recommend that you run, or were you kind of asked to run, or because sometimes that's how it works? I mean, give me the background. How'd you get?
I was asked, and I'll be honest, I was interested anyhow, because I think we all in this business think we're going to be involved in politics at some point in time. At that time, the entire legislature in Little Rock were lawyers. There weren't preachers and insurance agents in the legislature at that time. It was just about all lawyers. And I may have been thinking about that, but my first step was city attorney in Rogers. And it was an excellent first step for me because it gave me a broad experience. I got to know all the city fathers well, got to work with them, and was involved in all those decisions that were being made at that time. Rogers was forward thinking, still is, but it was particularly forward thinking at that time, and the city fathers were planning for the future and the growth that they expected to come. I'm not sure they expected it to be what it is today back then, but they were laying the groundwork. Some of the principles, for instance, in the Beaver Lake Water District, Rogers residents, Harold Moore, Hardy Croxton, those were the guys that were in the early stages there, along with others. I don't mean to exclude anyone, but they were leaders in that effort to create the water district. I just thought and still think that a lot of people thinking about the future and the betterment of the community, not just themselves.
You said you knew the city fathers. Who are some of the ones that stand out for their forward thinking? Can you give some examples?
Oh, sure. Well, Hardy Croxton would be one of those. John Swearingen. There were a couple of bankers, Hardy Croxton, and those people were thinking ahead. John Sampier, his father, J. Wesley Sampier, were part of that leadership corps. Bill Crum ran Stroud's department store in downtown Rogers, and Chamber of Commerce, all of those guys, and it was a lot of fun to know them. Well, of course, you advise the mayors on all aspects at that time of city government, and these fellows had experience. You have to remember, I had a year. They listened to me and were receptive and engaged me in the things I needed to be involved in. So I appreciated that, and I can say that for every one of them. The ones that I recall: Skip Gregory, and Harry Smith, Jack Cole, and of course John Sampier was the last. And John, I probably worked with John longer than the others. We had a succession of some of those fellows. They didn't serve real long, or I got there late, but anyhow, those were the ones. Jack Cole was the former police chief in Rogers, and a good man. And Harry Smith was also former military, I believe, and he and his wife had moved here and essentially retired, but he served as mayor for a time. And Skip Gregory was an interim, as I recall, because someone had, and I can't remember which mayor it was, that stepped aside early in the term. So Skip served, and then John Sampier was elected, and I believe beat Harry Smith. And as I said, I served the longest under him. After 8 years as city attorney, I thought that my practice was developing, private law practice, because I was just a part-time city attorney, as opposed to now where the city attorneys are full-time. I thought it was time to work on private practice, and so I did that from '86 on, and it worked out well for me. I was appointed to represent the Bella Vista Property Owners Association, which is a significant client for me back then. That would have been in '89, I believe. And of course, I was small town law here. I was doing everything that walk in the door that I felt like I could do. So it was a very good time. In any given day, you might be in district court or municipal court representing someone on a DWI or a speeding or traffic ticket of some sort, and the next hour drafting a will for a client that came in. Maybe at that time a lot of real estate transactions, and so we were busy doing a lot of deeds and abstracts and preparing the documents necessary to complete a real estate transaction. And when you are in this profession, there is some connection with history, always, because everything we do is based on what's come before. And a real estate abstract, unfortunately, young lawyers don't get to see those now, but it is a collection of every legal instrument from the beginning when the government deeds it to someone until the most recent owner. It's a collection of every instrument, deed, mortgage, easement, you name it, anything. Oftentimes there will be information in there regarding, because of guardianships or estates, the development of the family, who the family members were, that sort of thing. And so you learn the history of not only the land, but you learn the history of the community by what happened. And what happened to the people is they bought and sold land and that sort of thing. Sykes, one of the founding fathers of the city of Rogers, owned practically everything in downtown and around Rogers. And you follow the trail from him on down to everybody else. Well, actually, the patent deed from the U.S. government on through. And you get to know people through that medium. I think I found it fascinating.
And so nowadays they do what?
Nowadays it's all title insurance, and a lawyer is not, well, except for the abstract, our title company is not going to be involved in examining the title. So young lawyers don't get to see that nowadays. Well, as I said, from '86 on, I was developing my private practice. And again, like I said a moment ago, young lawyers, we did everything. Anything that would come in the door. And it involved litigation, as well as simple criminal cases, drafting wills and trusts, representing small corporations, those sorts of things. I had served as city attorney, and that had a lot of experience in the district court, had my own ideas about how it might be run, and because of Thurston Thompson retiring midterm, he was the municipal judge at that time. I thought, here's an opportunity. It always been in the back of my mind I might do that. Never had the opportunity before then. So in 1993, I got elected as municipal judge. I decided to run and was elected, and served in that position until about 2002 or so, when Amendment 80 passed and the courts, municipal courts, were done away with. We made district courts out of them because of Amendment 80, which modernized the judicial system. I was involved I was on the board of directors for the District Judges Association and for the Municipal Judges Association, and was quite involved in a lot of that, planning on how we would make the transition, for instance, and just trying to help develop what that court might look like. And ultimately, as I was winding down my term, convinced the other district judges in the area that Benton County need to have full-time district judges, and they agreed, and so we were included in the first round of changing to the pilot positions to full-time district judges. Well, there were just a handful of counties that did that at the time. The big deal was it eliminated part-time jobs, and now I think we're in the last cycle, and all district judges across the state will now be full-time professional judges. It does away with the part-time positions, and you might imagine there was some resistance to that. I think you mentioned that your father, Boyce Davis, was city attorney to help pay the light bill. A part-time position down in Lincoln, I'm sure. Well, a lot of judges liked that idea too, and were part-time district judges to supplement their private practice. That creates a lot of problems, particularly in a small town, because you might have ethical violations. Somebody is a client of yours that comes before you as a defendant in a criminal case. There are all kinds of considerations there that I believe the absolute right decision was made to create these full-time positions to eliminate those problems. And I think it's been accepted and implemented across the state now without much more fanfare. We went from nonpartisan elections. Back then, even all municipal positions or city positions and district judge positions were nonpartisan. The judges, however, county positions, state positions, were elected by party. And this eliminated that. Amendment 80 did. And it made the terms 6 years in length instead of 4. And it also divided the court's jurisdiction. Unified it. We used to have divided jurisdiction, chancery courts, which would handle property issues and family law questions, and then the circuit courts, which would handle criminal cases and civil cases. We have merged those now as a result of Amendment 80. Again, a modernization of the judicial system here in Arkansas. And so now any circuit judge could hear any kind of case that might come before a circuit court. Through the administrative plan, however, when you have multiple judges in a district like we do here in Benton County, we have 7 now, the judges can agree on what types of cases they will hear. And so we've divided our caseload into essentially 2 judges that hear the criminal cases, 1 juvenile judge who hears all the juvenile matters, and then 4 of us that hear all civil cases. That means family law cases, claims for money, damages like personal injury cases, any property claims, probate, anything of that nature. So with the exception of not handling criminal law, I guess the 4 of us that do that are more generalists than others.
As a judge, who are some of the attorneys that stand out over the years that you've seen in court? I know you've had a lot of attorneys before you, but who are some of the ones that maybe stand out?
Well, among the old timers, you have to first mention Jeff Duty. And Jeff is no longer with us, of course. He practiced until well in his 80s. And he had, at that point in time I got to know him, he was doing basically only district or municipal court cases, representing folks for any kind of misdemeanor or traffic violation, particularly DWIs. And he was a character to try a case with. He, as I understand it, had read the law rather than go to a law school, as did his brother, Claude. And Claude was not alive when I came to town, but his reputation carried on. And anyhow, Jeff had been with the Attorney General's office back in the 30s and had been in a variety of cases with some notoriety around here. I often think of the Queenie Rand murder trial that happened in the 50s, and Jeff was involved in that on the defense side. And another judge here, Ted Coxey, who was the chancellor at the time, was from Bearville. Benton County and Carroll County were the same judicial district back then. Ted Coxey was the prosecutor. And I'd always heard how Ted would quote the Bible and talk to the jury, and quite a character, and a very colorful character, as was Jeff. So I always think of those two. I also think of Russell Elrod from Siloam Springs. And Russell, although he didn't practice in front of me as a judge, I got to know him through the course of practicing in the county. And Russell was an old state senator, had been in the legislature forever, I guess, and he had a collection of interesting names because he worked in Oklahoma and read land titles over there, and it passed through the Cherokee tribes, and so you'd have these names that just stand out. He had a collection of all these Indian names. I thought it was hilarious. So that was kind of fun. J. Wesley Sampier, John Sampier's dad. He was an old-time legislator, always involved in politics, and of course involved in the National Guard, and he had taken the Guard unit in Rogers to Korea, as I understand it. And all I knew was that the Guard members, when Jay Wesley said, we're going to take a little walk, it was hard because he was like 6'4", and even as an elder statesman, which he was when I got here, the man could walk fast and cover a lot of ground, and he walked all over town. And the Guard unit didn't like those walks when he took them. He was known to give a stump speech, literally, and I've heard the story that he found some highway workers out on Highway 12 and stopped and stood on a stump and gave them a speech just because they weren't doing very much, and he thought they ought to be entertained, I suppose. Those were some of the lawyers I think about. And a lot of the things we do as circuit judges or as a district judge, frankly, is rather unpleasant. It involves unpleasant circumstances for someone. I have, in my mind at least, had sort of a gift of being able to leave it at the office, not take it home. There are very few cases that I can remember, and I did not prosecute any of these that I'm going to tell you about briefly. But I was involved because I was, in my position as a municipal or district judge, I was signing warrants, search warrants, which involved the affidavit of the events by some officer as to what crime had been committed. And I think of three right now. One was the Jesse Durkasing case, which was involved the in essence, asphyxiation of a 13-year-old who was tied up and violated by two men. And it was horrible, a horrible crime to imagine. It resulted in that church from Wichita, Kansas showing up. Forgive me, I don't remember their name. I don't want to give them credit for their name, but they came and protested during that trial and at some events that occurred in Rogers with signs that were disgusting and filthy. And these were so-called Christians doing this. And it was homophobic because the crime involved some of that. I remember that one. Very, very unpleasant. I remember Frankie Parker, who killed his in-laws and shot his wife and shot a dear friend, Ray Fine, who was a police officer. at the police station in Rogers. He invaded, and you may remember this case, he invaded the police department after basically a chase around town that officers were going from one crime scene to another trying to catch up to him, and ultimately he was at the police station in the basement of the old city hall in Rogers. He walked in through the police station door there in the basement, and Ray Fine met him like he would anyone else that was coming in for service, and Frankie started shooting. Parker was put to death sometime later after 2 trials. David Klinger may have told you about part of that case because he prosecuted it twice, I guess. I think of this Torres case because I read and did the search warrants on part of that case, and it is going to trial here soon, I think in the next couple of months, unless they postponed it again. It'll be the 3rd time to start the trial on that. And that was the murder of the 10-year-old son. The wife of Mr. Torres, mother of the child, has pled guilty and I believe has a life term. And Mr. Torres is sentenced to death once. It was reversed and come back, and it resulted in a mistrial because another child of his is an adult, vaulted out of the witness box and charged at him and at Mr. Torres. So it's coming back for another retrial. Again, the facts of all those cases were just horrible, unpleasant. I was administrative judge here for a long time. It seems like 8 or 9 years. And that position, I assumed the responsibility of kind of watching our caseload. There were 6 of us at that time. Since 2009 until last year, when we got a 7th position approved by the legislature, and Judge Christine Howard was elected to fill that slot. When I came to town, there were two circuit judges. Actually, one circuit judge, Judge Bill Enfield, and Chancery Judge, Judge Ted Coxey. And we started adding judges I think we added one in 80. We added in late 80s. We added another one in the late 90s, maybe 2 in the late 90s, and that got us to 5. Maybe it's 1 in the late 90s and 1 in early 2000, and then 2009 we got the new position, and then 2019 we got the 7th position. The growth of cases has been dramatic, just like everything else in Benton County. Numbers cause it, of course. We've had interesting influx of people. I think we've had 3 or 4 different groups that have been brought here in part. Start with some say start with the folks that came from Michigan when Daisy moved here in the 50s, but we've had the Vietnamese boat people, we've had the Cubans out of Guantanamo and thereabouts that Castro let go, and they were brought to Chaffee, and a number of them migrated into the Rogers or were sponsored Benton County. We had the Spanish or Latin migration, Mexican migration, I think a lot of people would say, but from Central and South America, and we've had a number of those folks. That has not stopped, it's continued. And we've had another wave of Vietnamese, Laotian, and Hmong. I guess Hmong would be part Vietnamese. But anyhow, all those folks have come, one reason or another, sponsored or getting out of where they were and being sponsored here in the state. We've had those groups. Plus, we've had the terrific growth caused by Walmart, J.B. Hunt, and Tyson's, largely attributable to Walmart, of course. And folks here coming from everywhere. And now I think because of the quality of life, the services and the opportunities that are here by reason of the investment in art and bicycle paths and everything else, we've got folks coming from everywhere, all over the country here. Waltons have always been very generous. Perhaps the grandsons have been more generous than any of the others. Alice has certainly made a huge impact with the development of Crystal Bridges and the Momentary, and Bentonville is remarkable. It is not the place at all any of us remember from even the early 90s.
So what was this town like in the early 90s and what it's like now? We've heard people talk about the square being just nobody on the square on the weekend. And so what was it like and what is the change?
It was a dusty, dumpy little town. That's all you can say. There was nobody here and nobody doing anything. Downtown was vacant after 5 o'clock. And there was absolutely nothing going on. Rogers was experiencing some growth, and it seemed that most of the Walmart employees from management and so forth were moving to Rogers. And well, that's reversed completely now. They're significant here in Bentonville. Bentonville was 5,000 or 6,000 when I came here. What is it now? 40? Something like that, 40,000. Rogers, like I said earlier, was 14,000. It's now approaching 70, I believe. Pea Ridge was a wide spot in the road, and look at the change out there. I don't even know what the population is. The west side of the county's been late to the party, but it's coming along quite rapidly. And we're seeing a lot of growth out there. We are soon going to be the largest county in the state, population-wise, and that's going to bring a whole lot more, I think. Probably what's changed as much as anything is it's kind of silly to say, but social media type crimes. And when I say that, I mean I'm talking about abuse, sexual abuse. We see tons of prosecutions for pornography and childhood pornography and all of that sort of thing. It seems like that's all that gets tried on the criminal level anymore. I know that's not true, but we see a lot of it. But that's what I see. We've got pretty good police forces here now. We always have had, I think, but we've got better trained people, and they're larger, more prepared to deal with the types of crimes we see today, and I'm impressed. We've got a good prosecutor and good prosecutor staff. I was remarking to one of the prosecutors who was in here a little bit ago before you arrived that I don't know a lot of them because I don't see them anymore. And she reminded me that most of them are brand new because they're young lawyers in that business. So, well, I would tell them that Benton County is a wonderful place to raise a family. That while it's growing, some of us don't like all the aspects of the growth that's come. For instance, trying to get from here to the west side of the county now is an adventure, as opposed, particularly if you're driving through Centerton. And some of those sorts of things are a bit of an annoyance, but it's part of the growth, and you have to deal with it. School systems are excellent. You're going to find housing to be affordable, generally speaking, as opposed to a lot of places. We've got a fine assortment of churches and other educational opportunities, such amenities as Crystal Bridges and the Momentary, and these downtowns have developed. They've morphed into something different than I would have ever expected, and they're a lot of entertainment opportunities available for everyone, young and old. And it's just, we've got Beaver Lake, we've got the White River, we've got, the Illinois River. We've got a lot of opportunities. And you still don't have to drive 3 hours to go hunting or fishing. So it's a wonderful place. I don't know if I could sum that up in one word. My favorite thing about Benton County is that it's my hometown, the whole place. And while I live in Rogers, I'm intimately familiar with all of Benton County, and I love its people.